So welcome everyone to today's local government education program, brought to you by the University of Illinois Extension and the Illinois Association of County Board Members. My name is Mike Delaney, and I'm an Extension Community and Economic Development educator based in Ogle County, up here in the northwestern corner of the state. Today's webinar will address the Illinois State Legislative Update for 2024. We're glad you're here. Let's begin with a few quick housekeeping notes. Most of them will be familiar to regular participants. Please note that if you desire, you can activate Zoom's closed captioning function at the bottom of your screen. We'll also be recording today's webinar and making it available on our Community and Economic Development YouTube channel. At the conclusion of today's presentation, registered participants will receive an email with slides and a link to the recording of the webinar. If you didn't register in advance for the webinar, but would like to receive the materials, that's fine. Just drop your email in the chat box to let us know. We'll make sure you get on the list. As always, you're welcome at any time to share your questions in the Zoom chat space. We'll have a review session at the end of the presentations for Q&A. Now, we're happy to welcome back, again this year, to this long-running educational series, our presenters for today, Kelly Murray, Taylor Anderson, and Debbie Thompson. Kelly, I'll allow you to make introductions for you and your team. Thanks so much.
Hey, thank you very much, Mike. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I want to thank Extension for hosting this annual event. We've been doing this probably now for well over a decade, and it's a very nice opportunity to share some of the information that we deal with respect to local government legislation with communities and other public officials around the state. I want to thank Nancy and Mike for hosting us today. Just a little background on the association. The Illinois Association of County Board Members and Commissioners was established back in the late 50s, 1960, to really provide assistance to county governments. We've been doing that through, in addition to our legislative advocacy, as well as education and various programs and purchasing programs and other things, just to help county governments out, and also the taxpayers of Illinois. So we do a lot in that area. Our legislative committee is very diverse. We have an operating legislative committee which develops a policy platform every year. The diversity of the committee is not only politically diverse, it is also diverse with respect to the counties that serve on it from around the state. So we have, obviously, up in the Cook and Collar region, we have counties on the committee, as well as our suburban and then the urban and rural areas. And what's great about our association is that we have a board of directors made up of all of the counties, and they all have an equal voice at the table. It's one vote per county. We do not differentiate between the size of counties. So we're very good about making sure that we have north, south, east, and west, and we have that diversity with respect to feedback on our committee and working with the General Assembly. So obviously, we're here today to talk about the new laws taking effect in 2024, and we had a number of bills in the first year of the 103rd General Assembly. It's not unusual. We saw almost just a little under 7,000 bills introduced. And with respect to county governments, we have about 1 in 7 with local government issues. So there's quite a bit to track every year. There's a lot to work on. There's a lot of things moving. And obviously, with the leaders of the General Assembly, they are able to also introduce a number of shell bills, we call them. And those shell bills are able to be amended throughout session with various different proposals and cleanup language and things like that. So it's a lot of monitoring through the year. The first year of the General Assembly it runs on a 2-year cycle. So the first year is always a little heavier. We're approaching the second year of the 103rd General Assembly. So we're probably going to see maybe around 3,000, a little over, bills introduced, about half of what we saw the first year. And again, probably a little bit of a smaller reduced session as far as the calendar is concerned, but it will still be pretty active. Sometimes we'll also see some cleanup measures come through, so we'll be working on some of those. This year in particular, I think last year we saw several labor law measures that were passed, and one of the most prominent right now that's being discussed and talked about a lot is the Paid Leave Act. I want to talk a little bit. We'll be discussing that amongst a few other things, and then we'll be turning it over to our legislative consultant, Taylor Anderson, to pick up on the other. But right now I want to introduce Debbie Thompson. Debbie Thompson is our HR consultant with the association and our insurance program as well. Her professional career, was in HR, and she also, to our value, has a local government background as well. She served on the Springfield City Council as well as on the Sangamon County Board. So she's going to take over and share the presentation on the HR and the labor laws, and then Taylor Anderson will pick up with the state budget, our legislative consultant, and he will do that as well as finalize and run us through the rest of the slides. And then I'll come back on at the end. We have a legislative summary we do every year, and I'm going to make sure that I send that to Nancy to be shared with all of you on the phone today. So with that, Debbie, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can get us started on the labor laws.
I have to unmute myself. That might help. Nancy, if you could forward the slides to the Paid Leave Act, the first slide and the employment laws. I think it's about 5 in, maybe. There we go. There we go. This has been a very complex journey, especially for employers dealing with how to react to the Paid Leave Act, because this is a new law that requires employers to provide paid leave to all employees for any purpose. This is going to create handbook changes, and I would recommend that you carve out a Paid Leave Act section so it doesn't muddy the waters with your PTO and your vacation. So it's very important to know that this has to be tracked, and hopefully everyone has a payroll system that can track all of these hours, because there is a record keeping requirement as well as a labor law poster. Note at the bottom that you can set reasonable and minimally increments of 2 or fewer hours. And again, they cap it at 40. An employer can offer more, but they cap it at 40. And if you have existing policies that provide this already, you have to do nothing. The only caveat with this Paid Leave Act is that they can take up to 40 hours in a calendar year for any reason of the employee's choosing. That is the difference in this. And it might create a change management strategy and training with your leaders because they're used to asking why people are taking off. So that's the other caveat with this law. You want to move to the next slide, Nancy? This is the poster that is required. And if you don't have this already, it is on the Department of Labor website, as well as all frequently asked questions. They are continuing to build those questions. Matter of fact, there are 2 more webinars, because as you might imagine, this builds some complexity for employers as far as handbook language, administration, and then just how to deal with who an employee really is. The Department of Labor actually dictates what an employee, how the employee is defined. So it's important that you pay attention to that. But this is the poster that needs to be displayed now. One point I will make is that your employees begin accruing this leave, but they cannot use it for 90 days. And that's from, if they started in January, then it would be March. If they started in February, it'll be April. So that's the only caveat to this new law. So make sure you pay attention to this poster. Next slide, please. Another law, the Child Extended Bereavement Leave. This is a very important law. It actually is also known as the Family Bereavement Act. And this was 2 weeks, and now they are entitled to up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave for companies with 50 up to 249 full-time workers. So this may not be in addition to the FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act. It's just an add-on if someone is not using FMLA. So this is another extension, and a much needed one, especially at the loss of a child by suicide or homicide. Next slide, please. The VESA expansion. Those of you may be aware that VESA is a very important law that's been in effect for quite a while. And It extends the unpaid leave from work for a family or household member who is killed in a crime of violence. Again, the 50 employee rule can use up to 10 days of paid leave in any 12-month period. Oh, I'm sorry, I was kind of skipped ahead here. It must be completed within 60 days after the date on which the employee receives the notice of death of the victim. And then the other one is employee organ donation. This is another extension somewhat of the Illinois Blood Donation Act, which that's actually an addition, requires employers with 51 more employees to provide employees with 1 hour to donate blood every 56 days. That's the blood donation, but this is the organ donation, which includes blood, but employees of businesses with more than 50 employees can use up to 10 days of paid leave in any 12-month period. Again, this is a paid leave situation. And there are caveats about being employed full-time on at least 6 months and received approval, of course. All of these are based on approval. Next slide, please. Okay. One thing I want to point out before I turn it over to Taylor is there are important employee labor notices that are included. And you must be aware of all of the poster requirements. The Paid Leave Act, the VESA has a new poster, and then the minimum wage, you know, everyone knows that minimum wage did go up January 1st to $14. And there are other labor posters that you want to make sure that you are up to speed and get those posted, not only on a bulletin board, but most importantly, if you have remote workers, it has to be emailed to them, and it has to be on the employee's intranet site. House Bill 3733 addresses the employee labor notices. And I'll turn it over to Taylor.
Thank you, Debbie. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on today's Zoom webinar. I hope you're paying close attention to the bills that Debbie went over, because as far as labor law is concerned in Illinois, 2023 saw quite a lot of changes and additions to the relationship between employees and employers. And so if you didn't spend this fall and the last couple of months of 2023 updating your HR policies and really delving into those legislations that make changes to that, I highly encourage you to do so as soon as you can, because there are a lot of changes that took place. And likely because of those changes that took place last year, we're going to see some more changes either in 2024 or potentially in 2025 as those issues, take place and get settled. Some of the changes that were made in particular with paid leave, some of the nuances haven't quite been figured out. There's likely to be more guidance issued from the Department of Labor over the early part of this year, and likely that could result in some potential lawsuits, which again may also change the landscape. So this is something you need to, as a county board member or as a locally elected official, really need to make sure that your community, your public body understands all of the impacts that these changes are going to have on your employees and how you operate business at the local level. With that said, we'll jump right into the state budget. We're going to hit just some of the highlights. After the budget, we'll move into specific individual bills that passed. Again, please keep in mind that this is just a brief snapshot of all the various bills. As Kelly said, there was, over 7,000 bills introduced. Of those 7,000, I believe 580 or so were actually signed into law by the governor. So this is just a small snapshot. I believe Kelly's going to send out a larger program that we compile at the association that will take a broader look at all of the bills that were signed into law that impact county and local governments. But with that in mind, let's move on. So the fiscal budget for FY 2024, was pretty painless. There was a lot of different expenditures and some surplus that came in. Some of that surplus was from federal dollars. Some of that was a larger than anticipated tax receipts. And we ended up having a fairly nice budgeting process because of that surplus there. Some highlights that I think are particularly important for local governments and county governments is an increase in the local government distributor fund. For those of you who are newly elected officials and might not be familiar with LGDF, for years, and this dates back to the 70s, local governments received 10% of income tax collected by the state. The state would collect those dollars and then remit 10% down to counties, municipalities, and other units of local government. Because of the kind of budget shortfalls and the financial dire situation that the state found itself in, when the income tax was made permanent several years ago, there was a reduction of that 10% down to 6%. So I think, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe over the last 10 years, local governments combined throughout the state have lost out on upwards of $1 billion of funds that they would have previous to that change would have seen. And so what we've been trying to do is steadily make small increases back to hopefully get us at or near that 10% dollar amount, because we know how essential and critical those local dollars going back to localities to make sure that services and programs are in place to help fund the taxpayers at the local level. So we were happy to see the General Assembly make an increase for the second year in a row to local government distributor fund, and we'll see whether or not we can make it 3 years. One of the other things I want to point out is the $30 million that was placed in the budget for law enforcement camera grant program. This includes body cameras, in-car cameras, and data storage, which is one of the things we've been really emphasizing with General Assembly members. There have been grants out there for the purchase of body cameras. If you remember back to when the Safety Act and other bills were passed, it mandates that local governments buy body cameras for all law enforcement by 2025. And there's been programs, like I said, in grants that have issued dollars for purchasing those actual body cameras. The part that hasn't really had a lot of dollars put behind it until this 30 million included it was for data storage. And again, I think one of the things that we've been stressing to lawmakers is body cameras is a one-time payment. You buy 100 or so body cameras, and that should hopefully last you a decade, if not longer. However, all of the footage those cameras stored costs money. And so it's important not only to have assistance to local governments for purchasing the cameras, but also for storing that data that's collected by them. And there's a whole other, costs that come with that, whether or not you have someone to be able to go through, redact things, if the footage is FOIA'd, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just the cameras themselves that have a financial impact to local governments. There's other considerations as well. And then the final thing I'll mention is, it's not on here, but it's as important, is that the Township Bridge Program, which for years, I think 30 years, had remained at $15 million. We were able to get an increase from $15 to $60 million. A lot of counties probably don't realize it, but they receive money out of that Township Bridge Program as well, as do townships. This goes to replacing and repairing derelict bridges across the state. Obviously, Illinois has a number of bridges, and we have several very old bridges throughout the state. And so this increase, we were very happy to see, and hopefully we can get more money into that fund, because bridges, the costs of repairing bridges and replacing bridges has gone up exponentially over the years. Before I move on to other slides, I will want to just quickly point out that Obviously the fiscal year 24 budget will end halfway through 2024. And so this spring session, they'll be crafting the FY25 budget. The numbers we're starting to see for that are far less rosy than the last year's budget picture. Right now, we're looking at pretty significant deficit. And so we're not anticipating the budgetary process to be as smooth this upcoming fiscal year as it was for our current fiscal year. And that could impact how quickly the General Assembly is able to get out in recess session this year, but also might trickle down and impact some other programs and things that the General Assembly might want to proceed with. We're being told that state agencies are being asked to cut their budgets that they're going to submit. So that's already kind of a little bit of a headwind of what we can anticipate facing for the fiscal year 2025. Nancy, next slide, please. Okay, we'll start down with new law, Senate bills. Again, keep in mind, this is just a snapshot. A lot of what we try to do with this webinar is to point out new laws, new changes, things that we think your local government, your county should be aware of and hopefully be planning for, because a lot of these changes, they might just be the first step in a multi-step or multi-pronged change for the state. So Senate Bill 40 deals with EV charging infrastructure. We know that, under this current governor and this administration, they've made electrification and moving away from traditional fossil fuels to greener energy as a centerpiece and hallmark. And so part of that is going to be building out EV or electric vehicle charging infrastructure. This bill is important because it newly constructed residential buildings and parking spaces will need to have conduits built in that will allow for EV charging stations to kind of readily be built out if there's a desire to do so. Again, either at the single family residential homes or in new parking spaces. I'll harken back to this a little later because we're going to talk about a bill that mandates the state purchase new EV vehicles for their fleets. And so this is going to be particularly important. You've got to have the infrastructure in place if the state is going to, start buying EV fleet vehicles. And there is, talk about mandating that local governments do this as well. And so we're starting to see that. This bill, this EV infrastructure bill, again, we wanted to point out just because this is something you need to start thinking about as you lay out your multi-year plan for your locality. This is something, we've had conversations with the various utility companies. It takes them multi-years to go ahead and plan out and build infrastructure on their end. And so it's going to take you multi-years to plan it on your end as well. So this is just one thing we want to make sure folks are thinking about now, because it's likely we're going to see some more bills like this dealing with infrastructure putting in place, especially for new construction, and we could see it at the local level as well. The next bill is Senate Bill 2014. This deals with public employees, the Public Employee Disability Act. And this is a new law. There was some change or modification to this during the pandemic, but this really locks that in place. The thrust of this includes the definition of illness to disease or condition under the Disability Act. And so what that means is, if you have, EMT or firefighter or a sheriff's deputy, or, what have you, if there's a declaration of disaster, and as a result, or during that time, that employee develops an illness or sickness or disease, responding during that declaration of a disaster or emergency. So this would apply not only to things, obviously like the pandemic that we just went through, but this could also, apply to a terrible flooding or a situation where there's a lot of damage by tornadoes, etc. Any of those things that could qualify under a declaration of disaster or emergency if, in response to that, a law enforcement official or officer gets an illness out of that, they're going to now have new leave available to them under the Public Employee Disability Act. So that's a new change. It only applies to home rule units and other units under a population of 1 million. But this is a new change. So if you think about if there's a tornado situation and you have folks responding to that and they develop an illness out of that, this is something that you're going to have to take into account as well. So again, this is just another one of those situations where labor employment law has changed, and we want to make sure that counties and others are aware of these changes so they can update their regulations and plan for any of these things that take place. Next slide, Nancy. Senate Bill 895 is it's a bit of a difficult bill to explain, but I'll try to be as brief as possible. Essentially what this bill does, and we spent a lot of time working with the proponents of this bill and the sponsors of this bill to make sure it didn't overly negatively impact county governments and other public bodies with regards to how intergovernmental agreements are utilized. My understanding is that there was a situation in one part of the state where a public entity was utilizing their public employees as essentially contractors, and entering into very soft kind of governmental agreements where they would essentially act as a contractor for another public body. The Illinois Intergovernmental Agreement Act is not really designed to be utilized that way. And so, like I said, what we've tried to do with this bill was, instead of when it was originally introduced as more punitive in nature, we've tried to just create guardrails around how governments can enter into IGAs with one another. Again, we don't want to prevent that. We certainly understand the utility and the cost effect that IGAs can have between governmental entities. That partnership really epitomizes doing more with less. But at the same time, we want to make sure that these guardrails in place so we don't see any, misuses of it. And so what this will do is this will allow for counties to enter into intergovernmental agreements with localities that are within that county. So if you have a township and you partner with that township, maybe you do some of their township roads, maybe they resurface some of the county roads, you'll still be able to do that as long as they are within the county itself. What you won't be able to do, and this again is why this bill was brought into place, is if municipality A is 30 miles away from municipality B, and municipality B is in a different town, a different county, the municipality A, they won't be able to enter into an intergovernmental agreement like they would have prior to. What we're really trying to do is funnel IGAs and the ability for local governments to utilize those IGAs where it makes sense. Now, this only applies to roadwork agreements. This doesn't apply to other things, but that does include things like sidewalks, obviously resurfacing roads, redoing alleyways, and bridge work as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. What this really, the guardrails, what they're really doing is focusing on, how close are you to that other unit of local government that you're going to be working with through the IGA. If you have existing IGAs and you feel like you might be running afoul of this new law. I highly encourage you to take a look at it. It's pretty detailed and spells out what can and cannot be done. I see a question popped up about mutual aid agreements. That is a great question. That was one of the things we were really worried about. There is a provision that exempts responding to disasters that are covered by mutual aid agreements. We wanted to make sure that mutual aid agreements were not touched. And so that was one thing we were able to carve out. Again, the idea of the bill was to provide guardrails, not to prevent communities from helping one another in situations where it really makes not only good moral sense, but also financial sense as well. Nancy, next slide, please. Excuse me. Continuing on with just some kind of new ideas that we're seeing, is Senate Bill 1543 establishes what's being referred to as the Illinois Law Enforcement Training Standards Board's PTSD Mental Health Coordinator. And what this is really focused on is dealing with law enforcement and the mental health crisis that we've seen kind of start to emerge in that industry. This is important. We know at a national level and at a state level, there's been and it happened over multi-years, a multi-year effort to disinvest in mental health support and what that at the state and federal level. And what that really meant was the state and federal level force those responsibilities down on the local level. Most of the time nowadays, when we're talking about mental health services, we're actually talking about local or private mental health. And so we're happy to see, or at least I'm happy to see, that the state is starting to understand that they have a responsibility. And so what we're hoping is that this kind of coordinator will be able to, look with a statewide lens of kind of how mental health is impacting, how PTSD is impacting law enforcement, and make sure that there's direction and training out there for law enforcement agencies to be able to utilize. And this would impact, and hopefully it will be tailored. That's one of the things the bill specifies, is that the training needs to be tailored for law enforcement agencies of various size, locations, and demographics. So really happy that the state is once again picking up the mantle, that they have a responsibility to be partners in addressing mental health and mental health issues. And I hope this is a return to that trend. Again, this is obviously, something that is being talked about at the national level. And so we're just happy to see the state kind of re-engage on this topic. Oftentimes, mental health and law enforcement, or at least in the past, were kind of treated as a bad pairing. But there are mental health issues that arise out of doing that work. And so this is a good recognition to try to put in place programs. How do we help our law enforcement officers deal with any of the stress and PTSD that might come along with their roles? So I'm happy to see that. I saw a question about, does this apply to firefighters and other first responders? My understanding of this is that it specifies law enforcement. And so I do not believe this right now, anyway, this position would cover firefighters or other first responders. Great question. That might be something, we need to have more conversations with the state about. This particular bill only handles, from my reading of it, law enforcement directly. The next bill, and earlier I mentioned this, is Senate Bill 1769. This bill, again, I think is part of a trend we're starting to see. as I mentioned, with electronic vehicles and the state moving towards electrification, this says by January 1st of 2030, passenger vehicles purchased or leased by a state agency, except law enforcement vehicles, must be zero emission vehicles. Now, I will say when this bill was first introduced, it wasn't aimed only at the state. This would have also applied to counties, to municipalities, and other units of local government. I think through conversations with the sponsors and other senators, we were able to get them to focus on the state first. But I do believe we're likely to see a push to include local governments in this either this year or moving forward. And so it's something we need to prepare for and be ready to respond to. Obviously, we're starting to see this transition to electronic vehicles. But again, as I mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily the concern of purchasing these vehicles or utilizing this new technology or being environmentally friendly. It's whether or not communities have the infrastructure in place. One of the points that I kept emphasizing when this included all public bodies, as well as the state and local entities, was that although 2030 seems like a long ways away, it's really just around the corner when you're talking about planning for public bodies. And so the fact that they were going to mandate this first without really allowing for or providing any assistance to local governments to set up the infrastructure for these electronic vehicles, I think is where we need to start. Let's not put the cart before the horse. Let's make sure that local governments have the infrastructure and the help they need to get that infrastructure in place before we start mandating what type of vehicles a local public body has to buy. One of the concerns I have is, you go out, you purchase these fleet vehicles, and maybe your city or your county has EV stations, but maybe you've got to go multiple counties over for some type of event, or there's something that needs to be done, and you look and there's no infrastructure over there for your electronic vehicle. So how are you supposed to travel if you don't have any other passenger vehicles or fleet vehicles available to you? So one of the things I hope, and we've been having conversations with stakeholders on this, is let's make sure the infrastructure is in place first before we jump ahead and start mandating what type of vehicles can be purchased. I will also say, as an aside on this bill, originally this included more vehicles. There was not an exemption for law enforcement. There was a concern, that this would include emergency response vehicles, whether that is, the fire marshal, whether that is, there are mobile units that aren't necessarily fire trucks that I know a lot of fire departments have started to utilize because it allows them to get on scenes a little quicker, a little easier, and not necessarily have to take the whole engine out on a call or responding to a call. And so those are some other things that need to be thought about as well. But again, wanted to bring your attention to this because although this bill only now deals with the state, when it was first introduced, it was much larger, and I think we'll see more bills like it in the future. Next slide, please. Senate Bill 1818, which for those of you who are history buffs or love the state of Illinois, I hope you noticed the bill number, along with the illustrious year that Illinois became a state. That said, this is kind of an interesting bill. I just included it because this is one of those fun issues. This kind of it creates a state commission to develop new state flag ideas. It doesn't say that they will be adopted, but this commission will make recommendations to the General Assembly. So I know that there are several counties out there that have lovely county flags. There are several municipalities and townships that also have beautiful, wonderful flags. If you have an idea for a new state flag, this commission is accepting designs, and I would encourage you to submit your design if you have one. I like our flag and would be sad to see it go, but I'm interested to see kind of what takes place with this new commission. The next bill is Senate Bill 1997. This deals with counties in populations of less than 1 million and their ability to establish requirements for new building designs and construction to lessen the risk to wildlife and sensitive habitats. We're happy that if counties choose to do this, they now have the ability to do that. There was some question before this bill was signed into law, whether or not a county that was non-home rule, and there's only one home rule county in the state, which is Cook County, whether those counties had the ability to do this. So this just gives counties the authority if they so choose. This doesn't mandate that you have to, but this allows you to do so if you so desire. Before this bill was introduced, I had no idea the number of wildlife and birds, particularly that suffer injury or death by flying into glass infrastructure, glass buildings, particularly along some of our beautiful waterways in the state. So for those that might be in a migration flight path, etc., this allows you to at least have some control over how those buildings look if they can minimize some of the risk and danger to wildlife and other sensitive habitats. Next slide, please. Thank you. House Bill 1067, and obviously we're moving into House bills now. This makes a change to the county superintendent. Prior to this, there was qualifications necessary to be appointed and confirmed as the county superintendent of public works. This bill was an initiative of Lake County, but several other counties, including our organization, supported this change. This allows for now that if you have, excuse me, someone that has maybe worked in the county superintendent's office, they have to have at least 10 years of professional management level experience in either a municipal or county public works department. They can now be considered for the position of county superintendent of public works. With all of the various kind of difficulties sometimes with finding the right people for the jobs, hiring the right people for the jobs, and maintaining those people in those positions, this just gives a little bit more flexibility at the local level. We have several people that work in the county engineer's office or public works office who might not have the accreditation of engineering, but have spent 10, 15, 20 years essentially working in an office and doing the job. So this just allows a county a little flexibility. You would still need to have at least one employee in the county's public work department that needs to be a licensed professional engineer. So you're not really using that knowledge base there, but this just allows, for maybe someone who has excellent management level skills, who's worked in the department to take on the lead role. Next slide, please. And I saw a question about the previous bill, or excuse me, 2 bills ago, about whether or not the new build mandates could be applied to solar or wind. My understanding is that you are correct; they cannot be applied to solar installations. Wind, there is a concern. I've heard it mentioned many times about wind turbines and their impact again on bird migration. I haven't heard too much about solar projects, and so that that's something to keep in mind as certainly as the state starts to see more of those developments come in and take place. House Bill 1076 is a bill that has been out there for a long time. It took several years. There was a couple of counties that, let me back up. My understanding is that several counties throughout the state were already doing something very similar to this, but there was nothing in statute that allowed for this to take place. And this is for the county to own and lease farmland. And so what this bill does is it creates the ability for the county to do that. It will take up to 3/4 vote by the county board before the county can lease the farmland. That lease cannot exceed 5 years. There's a lot of back and forth about that timeline. Some of the opponents wanted it to be as little as 2 years. There is a push by some to have that, as high as 10. But it was settled on 5. Hopefully that gives enough time for, the person making the lease of the farmland, to be able to receive a return. There's a concern that a short period of time wouldn't allow for really them to see a return on their lease. And it's important to note that counties shall not acquire farmland for the sole purpose of entering into these type of farming arrangements. There was a real concern that public dollars would be utilized to buy farmland, to lease it out, to essentially create a revenue stream for counties. Now, most of my understanding is that most of these counties who are currently doing this, it's it's farmland that the county was given many years ago. Sometimes these plots of land have been on the county books, for 50 years, if not longer. So again, this just kind of clarifies that. We were trying to not rock the boat too much and allow counties who are doing this to still do this. But you now, if you are currently doing this, you now will need a 3/4 vote to be able to continue moving forward. So that's an important change. Wanted to just make sure everyone's aware of. House Bill 1236 deals with competitive bidding. Again, this was another situation where some counties were already doing this, and there was nothing in statute that explicitly allowed for county boards to be able to do this. So, when a county constructs their competitive bid or their responsible bidder provisions by ordinance, there was, I believe off the top of my head, 5 things that must be part of that responsible bidder. Sometimes counties would add a couple other things in there. And this was one that several counties had added, but there were some questions by a few states attorneys about whether they had the ability to do that. So this just makes it clear that they can. And it says that in a county with fewer than 2 million inhabitants, if you are constructing, a competitive bid, you can consider as part of your responsible bidder ordinance, whether or not that bidder has active participation in an apprenticeship program that's registered with the U.S. Department of Labor. So again, if you're one of those counties that already has this on the books, there was some gray area about whether or not that was actually allowable. This just clarifies that it is. Next slide, please. I see a question before we move on about, excuse me, one of the previous bills we talked about dealing with the public works. If you have a county engineer, I believe is what the question, and not a superintendent of public works, does it apply to your position? And I believe, let me just double check real quick, but I believe that this bill specifies a county who employs a superintendent of public works. I think there's a separate statute in the county code that deals with county engineers. Good question. I'll have Kelly and myself take a look, and we'll make sure we respond to Nancy, just to make sure that my read is correct on that. But I believe that that it does not have any relevance to you if you have a county engineer. Continuing on with House Bills is 1540. This deals with e-cigarettes, and I'm going to speed up just because I want to make sure Kelly has time to wrap up, and if there's any additional questions, we get to them. This just makes smoke-free Illinois, which was passed, in 07 or 08, electronic cigarettes, e-cigarettes, vapes, whatever the nomenclature used. Smoke-free Illinois now applies to e-cigarettes and vapes as if it would a normal pack of traditional tobacco and cigarettes. This just updates the law to keep up with technology. House Bill 2473. This is one that I want to just, again, highlight because this is new technology and counties need to be aware of it so you can start putting a plan in place and wrap your heads around what this might mean. There is currently, or there was a moratorium in place for new nuclear energy in Illinois. And what that meant in previous years was that no new nuclear power plant could be built. There are now, excuse me, there are now small nuclear reactors that are being developed, and they're not quite ready yet. My understanding is we're still maybe 5 or 10 years away from this. But these small nuclear reactors, instead of being, its own infrastructure, its own building that goes onto the public utility grid, that these small reactors could instead be utilized for solely one industrial facility. So think of a large manufacturer, they might decouple from the grid and have their own small nuclear reactor on site, which would take care of their energy needs. So this lifts the ban for these kind of newer technologies. They're called small modular reactors. Again, the technology is not quite there yet. There is still more federal guidance that needs to be written and adopted by the feds on these small modular reactors. But the technology seems to be almost there or nearly there. And so the state is trying to get ahead of that a little bit and allowing these to be put in place. There are a lot of questions I still have that are unanswered about these. Security, if there is a disaster declaration or emergency, who's responsible, what training's needed, for our EMS and for our, firefighters and fire protection district, volunteer firefighters, et cetera. So this is something that I think I want to make sure counties are aware of because it's so new, but this could really change the landscape for how nuclear power is utilized, and certainly at a smaller level, but also needs some real thought to it on how this could impact a county, how a county might want to zone for this, and what kind of training and things personnel might need to have in order to be able to respond to this. So a new technology and something we wanted to make sure is on your radar screen. It's not quite here yet, but we think it's on the horizon. It could be here soon. Next slide, please. Again, I'll try to run through these pretty quick. House Bill 2447 allows for remote attendance if the majority of the public body is present physically and there's an unexpected childcare obligation. We're going to see more of these bills moving forward about allowing public body to have their members participate remotely. One of the questions I have is whether or not county governments and others are technologically advanced enough to allow this to happen, and also what that means if public body members are not allowed to be physically present. What does that mean for citizens? And so there's a lot of unanswered questions as we move towards this kind of new Zoom remote virtual meeting landscape. But I imagine we're going to see more bills like this introduced in 2024. House Bill 2539 deals with county official stipends. This just makes kind of a payroll change that all the county treasurers need to be aware of, because they're going to be the ones responsible for this. Instead of the stipends being paid by the Department of Revenue to the individual office holders, the Department of Revenue is going to instead ask the county to calculate and then send the Department of Revenue an amount. The Department of Revenue will remit those dollars directly to the county treasurer's office, and then the county treasurer will be the one that's actually going to hand out those stipends. And then all of the paperwork, IRS documents, etc., will be handled by the Department of Treasurer's office and not the Department of Revenue. This was one of the Department of Revenue's top agenda items last year. To me, it looks like kind of a payroll thing. They're trying to take some work off their hands and push work down on local government bodies. Hopefully this makes things a little quicker for county officials and their stipends. We'll have to see how this plays out in the day-to-day real world, but wanted to make sure that you are aware of this if you're a county official, or that if you're a county treasurer, this is something you need to be preparing for. If you are a county treasurer, you have to open or create a dedicated account to handle in these stipends from the state. So that's something else you need to be aware of. Next slide, please. These three bills I'll handle kind of as one, and just want you to be aware of the changes these are having, or potentially will have on your public body. House Bill 2845, House Bill 3370, and House Bill 3491 all make changes to prevailing wage and jobs that were not considered prevailing wage prior to these bills becoming law that will now be considered prevailing wage projects. The first, or I'll start at the bottom at House Bill 3491. This deals with a person who's paid below prevailing wage, and it gives them a right of action to recover wage losses. House Bill 3370 deals with power washing. So anytime you're going to hire a contractor to come in and power washing is part of a project, think washing windows to cleaning, a municipal water tower, everything in between. If you use a power washer, now is going to be a prevailing wage project. That could have a significant cost depending on how often you contract out work to do for power washing. There is a court case that protects public employees who are doing work on a project. So your own employees will not have to be paid prevailing wage, but if you hire a contractor, let's say they're going to remove graffiti from a wall, if they're using a power washer, that is now considered a prevailing wage project. House Bill 2845 deals with the transportation of biosolids. Biosolids mostly, this is going to deal with removing treatment for wastewater and those treatment plants. Now, beforehand, a lot of times you wouldn't even have a contractor do this. I know I talked to several counties and several farmers who, would have kind of an agreement in place. The farmer would go out, pick up the biosolids from the wastewater treatment plant and take them to their fields because they utilize them as fertilizer. Now this is going to force that public body, that contract has to be paid at a prevailing wage rate. So that's going to be a large change if you have a water treatment plant, and just something we want to make sure people are aware of. Nancy, next slide, please. These two bills, again, are just different or new. Want to make sure everyone's aware of these. House Bill 3902 allows for drones to be utilized by first responders. This is really in a response to what happened on July 4th, the terrible tragedy in Highland Park. This now allows for law enforcement to utilize drones for parades or walks, festivals, concerts, etc., which was different than before. So you may see, line items increase in the sheriff's budget for purchasing more drones, because there's the ability to utilize them in a wider range of banners now, and they are considered, via this law as first responders and able to be utilized during these large scale events, whereas before they were not. House Bill 3903 is a response to obviously a lot of the lawsuits and ethics violations we saw, but this bans automatic traffic enforcement companies or their officers from donating to candidates for public office at the state and local level. It also establishes revolving door ban, but again, that's that's more of a state, but it does apply to local government officials for accepting jobs or contracts with those companies for 2 years after leaving office. So this is just a new ethics change that we've seen. Again, in response to some of the ethics violations we saw with red light cameras, but want to make sure you as elected officials are very clear about what these new guidelines are when you're dealing with any automatic traffic company or any of their officers who work for that company. Nancy, next slide, please. Just to wrap up very briefly, this is a calendar of some key dates for the second year of the 103rd General Assembly. Probably most important on there is going to be February 21st, was the Governor's State of the State and Budget Address. As I mentioned when I first started talking, the budget this year is a little dire than we saw this most recent year. And so it will be very interesting to see, and it will give us a great roadmap for what the governor's looking at, and what the state of our fiscal house is. And so this will be an excellent kind of snapshot or crystal ball into how ultimately what this budget might look like at the end of the year. The last important date is the Illinois General Assembly is scheduled to adjourn on May 24th. They also have some backup dates from May 24th, or I should say from May 25th through May 31st, just in case they're not able to reach agreement on a budget by the 24th. Again, that might be important because if we're several $billion in the hole, coming to an agreement on a budget becomes a lot more difficult. So they gave themselves a little extra time. So keep those two dates in mind. February 21st might give you a good idea whether or not the General Assembly is going to be able to adjourn on the 24th or whether or not they're going to go through May 31st. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kelly. If there's any questions, we can go back and answer them.
Thank you, Taylor. With that, I think we've addressed everything in the chat box. If not, you are welcome to contact us after the meeting. If you'll see on this slide currently, we do publish throughout the year our Counties at the Capitol, which is a publication highlighting the current status of many of the bills that we are advocating and also monitoring. That is mainly for our association members and our county government officials. So again, that is something, if you're a member here, you will receive the Counties at the Capitol. We also published the new laws summary, which I just mentioned, that was published in December, and that's what I will be sharing with Nancy today. I'll send that to her for those of you that participated with us on the phone. It covers a much broader aspect of many of the bills that we were monitoring or looking at or that became signed into law. It covers about 30 different categories, some of which we spoke about today, but again, this was just a tip of how many bills that we do monitor. Again, this summary is about a 16-page publication. It'll be broken out into various categories, so you can kind of look of where it might be of interest to you. It covers local government as well as townships, veterans, the special districts. We're talking about energy, environment, labor, law enforcement, all of the different categories. So this will show you a little broader picture of what was placed into law. Again, if you are a county government official member here and you want to sign up to receive these publications on a regular basis, you can email me at theilcounty@gmail.com and we'll get you placed into the database. I do believe the majority of the county governments are receiving our publications, but if not, please feel free to sign up. With that, Nancy, unless there's any additional questions, we just want to thank you again, and I want to thank Taylor for the excellent job he did. He has a lot on his plate in any given year, and we have a lot of bills to monitor, so he does an excellent job for us, and we're very welcoming also now of Debbie Thompson on the labor side with the HR issues. So if you have any questions, please feel free to send them to us and we'll address them. We know we went a little over here, Mike, so I'll turn it back over to you.
Kelly, Taylor, Debbie, thank you so much for your very extensive summary and very useful. I'm sure everybody on the call appreciates it. We're going to take just a quick second for the folks that are still here to put up a quick poll for reactions. And I will note there was somebody who's concerned that the link for the summary isn't working. Julie, we will get a working link to you when we send out the materials for the for this webinar in the next day or so. So positive thoughts, we will get it to you. Just if you wouldn't mind, take a moment quickly to provide your input. Let us know the value of the presentation. Debbie, there were a couple questions early on that related to the Paid Leave Act. And I'm not sure we have enough time to dive into both of those, but Mr. Perry and Ms. DeLaurentis, perhaps afterwards you can circle back to our friends here from the IACBM and get answers from them about the applicability of Paid Leave Act to entities, or what the threshold is for application and whether it applies to federal employees.
I think if you have a federal employee and they're on an Illinois payroll, they are entitled to that. That's the most recent explanation that I got from the Department of Labor. Because there is always complexity when you have employees from different states or if they receive federal grants or something of that nature. But that is what they're telling me right now. They are going to be publishing the rules at the end of March. So we hope to have a little bit more information. There's still some gray areas that they're working out. I will tell you, there was in the chat about the threshold. There is no threshold for number of employees for the Paid Leave Act. It pertains to all employers in Illinois, except for Chicago and Cook County. They have their own ordinances. And of course, union employees are driven, their rules are driven by their collective bargaining agreement, their CBAs. And they do not need to comply with the act right now, but when they come up for expiration, I'm sure that will be on the table.
Okay, we got a quick question about applicability to part-time and extra help.
Part-time, absolutely. If they're on your payroll, it's 1 hour for every 40 hours worked, up to 40 hours in a calendar year. Now, the extra help, it depends. And I've got a question still into the Department of Labor. Because if they're on call or something, if they're just an extra help, I do not believe, I'm not an attorney, but I do recommend that they 1099 those employees so they don't become subject. But again, I would seek legal counsel on that question.
Terrific. Thanks so much. Succinct and to the point. Appreciate it. All right. I think with that, we will close out today's session. On behalf of the University of Illinois Extension, Kelly, Taylor, Debbie, thank you so much for being part of this for us. We always enjoy collaborating with you at the beginning of every year to help folks understand what's coming their way in terms of new legislation that they and their constituents are going to have to pay attention to. As I mentioned earlier, and Nancy's dropped this in the chat, if you registered for the webinar, you will receive the presentation materials and a link to the recording in a follow-up email. If you're not already receiving our email notices about upcoming webinar offerings, please drop your email into the chat before you go, and we will add you to the list. For example, later this month, on Tuesday, January 3rd, again at high noon, you can join us for the inaugural episode of a new series of webinars entitled Thriving Communities, part of Illinois Extension's effort to build capacity for technical assistance and education to help communities navigate energy and environment-related federal grant application systems, among other themes. I'd also invite you to visit our website at go.illinois.edu/LGE to get access to our video archives on a host of our prior presentations on a wide variety of community development topics. So with that, thank you all again for attending our webinar today. Have a great day, and we hope to see you back for future presentations. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.